she will bark.
That's fine, don't worry about it.
No, I'm just gonna tell you so that.
Can we get
You're
her
in the
to,
living room though.
she's in the picture now. And take her out.
I have to actually ask you these questions otherwise.
They won't know what I'm saying, right?
Yes.
It's like when you see an interview on television.
I won't know what I asked you either when I later.
Okay.
Most of these questions are pretty straightforward. Just feel free to narrate it at any time. I'm not here to get this done in a hurry. Just here to get the info, hear your story, I guess. So we'll start with how many people lived in your house when you were young?
Well, of course, the answer to that's kind of confusing. When I was tiny, there were 4 of us out east. My brother and I and my mother and father. But later on, when he became ill, we went to a veterans hospital. Here comes Trump.
Trump, we're going to go over there.
Trump, come.
Trump, that way.
Trump, come.
Crazy old guy.
Anyway, we moved to Wisconsin, where for a short period of time we lived on a farm with 8 of us out on the farm. And that lasted for 2 or 3 years, and then we moved again to Beaver Dam, where again there were my brother and I, and my mother and her sister. The next move was to Madison, where again there was my brother and myself, my mother, and we had a rooming house. Joan.
She won't hurt anything. Just keep it
short
walking.
enough.
She's not in the picture. Right?
She's just short
Doesn't
enough.
matter.
Anyway.
You probably add to it anyway.
Anyway, the rooming house had something like 9 students in it. And this lasted for 4 or 5 years, and then finally we moved to an apartment where there was just the 3 of us. And my brother went into the military service, and after that lived away from home. There were just 2 of us when I was a teenager, my mother and myself. My father, during all this period of time, was in the Veterans Hospital until he died, which he died when I was about 8 or 9 years old.
Okay. How big was your house, or houses? How many people would have go into one bedroom when they were young?
Most of the time we spent in, when I was a child, a youngster, was in Madison, and in both cases my brother and I shared a bedroom, and we lived in a rather large houses at first, then later in apartments with my brother and I shared a bedroom, and my mother had the other bedroom. Usually 2-bedroom apartments after we left the house where we had roomers and boarders.
Okay. When you were young, was your family the traditional type of family where the male went out and made the money and the female stayed home with the children?
Well, as you can see, my father, from the time I was really an infant, wasn't in the home. He was in a hospital and then died. My mother had to work to support the family. Of course, when we were in grade school, she had a rooming and boarding house, so she was there at home all the time, and that was her intent. But later on, she had, as we got into the upper grades in grade school and in high school, she worked outside the home.
Okay. How did raising your own children differ from that of how you were raised?
I think that, as we've compared to what we previously mentioned, we raised our children almost throughout their infancy and their young ages. We were, the mother was at home. I worked, and she stayed at home with the children until they were in high school, most of them, and then she did have part-time jobs outside of the home, but usually managed to be home when the children got back from school.
How did your children's schooling differ from yours? Was any major differences?
The only major difference perhaps would be that they went to a parochial school, a smaller school. But later on, when attended public schools, I attended some of our children went to a parochial high school, and as did my wife and myself.
Was the lack of money ever a problem when you were raising children? And if so, how was this obstacle overcome?
Well, we had 12 children, and it was not inexpensive. In order to meet our expenses, when the children were very young, I managed to have two jobs, part-time jobs. And as we've already mentioned, Pat stayed at home. So we met our expenses with a job and for a while 2 part-time jobs. Later on I was promoted to a supervisor, and it was no longer necessary, nor was I able to hold outside part-time jobs.
All right. Were all your children very close to each other?
I would think so. When you have a family of 12, they're of necessity. They bond together, and they help each other. They have to. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been able to manage the family, such a large family. The older children were closer to the younger children and helped them in homework and in getting dressed for school.
And did this ever affect, like, did you view your family as, I don't want to say better, but you thought that was the way things should be, or did you think that your family was just like every other family and their children were all
We were busy doing our own thing. We never really thought much about other families. We knew that there were families that were both husband and wife had to work and created problems, but we were not confronted with this problem. We felt sorry for those people that weren't able to be home and had to use babysitters and had problems with their children because they weren't home.
Is your family still very close?
Yeah, I think so. I think they keep in contact. They're quite friendly, and they have a fairly good relationship, I think.
When you were young, what was the popular type of clothing? Kind of big fad clothing that you would wear when you were young?
No, most of the things were a little different then, and most of the youngsters wore traditional slacks and pullover shirts, and unlike now, the girls wore dresses. There wasn't the tendency towards slacks and jeans, blue jeans that there is now. And of course, especially in parochial schools, they were required to dress a little more than I think in the public schools. But now, blue jeans are standard, even in going to church.
All right. When you were young, what kind of music did everyone listen to? What was the popular type of music that you could?
Well, back then, the music that we had in our home was generally the orchestra music. Wayne King, Guy Lombardo, and music like that. The music was very traditional.
Were your parents very religious people?
Not really, not really. It was just a way of living with my mother.
Go to church.
You know, she went to church with us, and of course made sure that we got to go to a parochial school. But I don't really think that it was. She just kind of took it for granted as an element. But she was busy supporting the family, and never really seemed to do much more than say prayers with us at night. But then, as we got to be kids in grade school, well, we did our own prayers. She was too busy.
Did you make your children go to church when they were young?
We went to church, yes.
What from your childhood would you consider an artifact that we no longer use, such as like one of the old-fashioned radios, the big, huge ones?
Well, we still have around the house, because I fancy them. We've got kerosene lanterns. Kerosene. When I was a youngster out on the farm, our only light was kerosene lanterns, and I have fond memories of the kerosene lantern in the middle of the kitchen table and out in the dining room. That was our light at night. That's one of the things that sticks with me in my memory.
Excellent. What did the youth do for fun when you were young?
I think that there was more, well, I can't say more sports, but the traditional sports, baseball, roller skating back then was much more popular than you could imagine it is now. And the kids played games in the street. On the playgrounds, they were talking about mostly baseball, because in the playgrounds I don't think they didn't have the equipment at our school. They'd play ball, play catch.
What did the youth do for fun when your children were young?
That's a good one. They played games in the house. We had board games. They'd play games. Of course, the girls, the younger girls, had dolls, and the boys had their mechanical toys that they played with. And out on the street, they just, in the winter, we had sleds, skates. They enjoyed the sport, things like that in the winter.
How big was the closest neighboring town or city when you were young?
If we're talking about when I was very young, we were out in the country on the farm, and it was 10 miles to Richland Center.
What was the name of the city that you were?
Richland Center.
That you lived in?
We didn't live in the city. We were on the farm.
Did it have a town name? Or
No.
You just lived out in the country?
Country. Farm. So it was 10 miles to each of the nearest cities.
Alright, and have you ever returned there?
Yes, frequently. In fact, Richland Center, which we used to visit, it's unusual, but I was acting postmaster there. So I got to return to Richland Center, see the people that we used to know.
All right. When did you meet your spouse, and how?
Let's see. I met her when I was 26 years old, and I met her because my mother visited her house, and I went with her. My mother to visit. I met her, was introduced to her at the home.
And was there any particular moment in your life when you knew that this person was going to be with you for the rest of your lives? You guys hand in hand all the way?
Yeah, when we were married. I realized this is it, you know, there's no turning back.
Are there any stories that your family passed you? If you want to tell them, that's completely fine.
And let's see.
Folk tales or anything like that.
Well, the one story, one of the stories that my mother passed on to me is the fact that she took my brother and I when we were very small, must have been 2 or 3 years old, to the beach at Atlantic City. And we sat at the edge of the water after a picnic and watched the waves come in. She said that she was picking up my brother to take him back to the pavilion, and was going to return for me, and when she turned around, a rogue wave, a large wave, had come in and washed me out, taken me out to sea. And she ran down into the water, and the next wave threw me back on shore. Probably I'm still here.
I'm here.
Yeah, come to think of it, would have an effect.
All right. How many jobs have you had once you worked more than a year? Just name a couple off the top of your head.
When I left high school, I started working for the post office, and I worked there all my life.
How long was that?
41 years.
Whoa, I skipped like 2 questions.
We'll go back.
All right, are there any traditions, in your family that still exist today?
Well, I think the holiday traditions are the ones that continue. The Thanksgiving, Easter, Christmas, the traditions carry on. I think all of our children have memories when they were little of the Christmas trees and the Easter bunny, and I think that's carried on into their own families.
Alrighty. Have you started any new traditions since you had your own children?
None that I can think of. Let's see. Not right offhand.
Okay. Alright, number 22. So
23.
Were your educational hopes fulfilled when you were younger?
Well, I started the post office before I completed the university. And although I have taken courses since then and have a senior standing at Edgewood College, actually 1 semester to go, I have never completed college.
You always hope to?
I think it's not very logical and too expensive.
Did your educational hopes affect the jobs you've had in your life? Do you think you got a better job because you went
I
to
think
college?
that I did all right with the job I had, but there were promotions that were not available to me without a degree.
Excuse my slow handwriting. Did you raise your family in the city or the country?
Well, you already know that we have spent all of our time here in the city, and I think we liked it that way. the convenience of the city, and the closeness of facilities, schools, church, doctors, stores. It's much more convenient.
So you said you probably wouldn't have wanted to live out in the country?
No, we had the opportunity, and we made the choice to live in the city.
All right. Without thinking, name one of the greatest moments in your life.
I think it's when we were married, my wife and I.
When you were young, what were your friends like?
They were like me. Uh, the people I knew when I was in school were fellows that pretty much like me. We had the same interests. In some ways, we were perhaps more religious than the other people in the parochial school, because two of my closest friends, one was Father Raymond Haas, and another is a Dominican brother. And I still keep in touch with the Dominican brother. Later on, I had friends at work, and generally they were men with families too, because we shared that interest, and there were people that, of course, shared the same bond, you might say, of working in the post office. And they don't differ, at least from my friends now, because they are the same people, pretty much the same. I have friends now that I know mostly from our church, which that I've known for many years.
Who's the oldest living relative of yours that you ever remember meeting?
Now, that question infers that the person is still living?
No, that they could be dead now, but
Okay.
the oldest person, our oldest living relative that you
Yeah, I think that my grandfather probably was the oldest. He lived until he was 83. And
throw a name at
I knew him, Henry Kellner. Henry was a farmer, and I knew him well because I went out to the farm every summer when I was in high school, grade school.
Which two presidents impacted your life the most over the years?
I think Carter,
Could you tell me why?
because he had such a sense of integrity and honesty. You were convinced that he was not just a politician, but that he was an honest, straightforward person. And I think Reagan impressed me because he was a person first, and he was to a great extent, was a politician second. He didn't need, he didn't have any significant political background. He didn't come with any agenda prior to that time or any political baggage.
Excellent. Who is your favorite president of all time? Like any president since our country started?
Gosh, I think a lot about Abraham Lincoln. I'm impressed with the same qualities, and integrity and honesty and determination to do what was right.
I didn't even ask my other grandpa this one, but who's your least favorite? I forgot.
I don't know. That's hard to say. Probably Carter, because he has none of those qualities.
All which wars have you lived through, and how did they affect your life?
Just World War II and of course the other wars. How'd they affect my life? Comparatively
Any of them?
little.
Yeah.
I mean, things were not quite as easy, but there was, how did they affect my life? Probably because I might not have worked at the post office if there hadn't been for World War II. I remember that the government at the time was asking people to work in necessary industries, and the post office was considered an essential industry.
Getting letters to troops.
Hmm?
Getting letters to troops overseas.
Well, it maintained communications
Yeah.
throughout the country.
How old were you when you first watched the television? Like, even if you just saw it through the store window or anything like that?
Gee, I don't know. It's hard to say.
My favorite
Hard to
question.
say. Yeah.
Even if like general, like teens,
I can-
20s, 30s.
Let's see now. Probably about, I was probably about 25 or 26.
Have you learned or seen things on TV you otherwise might have not? And
Oh
if
yes,
so,
I think they cover just a broad range of things, especially the news programs cover things much more completely.
any other things you remember seeing on the old tube over the years that really sticks out in your mind?
No.
We're getting to the fun questions now. What was the most important invention during your lifetime, and how has it affected you?
I think that the computer chip is probably the thing that's been just critically important in what has happened in the years, and it has only perhaps remotely affected my life, but it has affected everyone because the ability to use computers in businesses. When I was at the post office, we computerized all the forwarding systems, and was one of my tasks. It just has speeded things up and made things more accurate for the post office, and the financial operations in the post office were much more accurate.
How has diversity over the years changed since you were young?
What do you mean by diversity?
Well, I mean, like, there's that big 60s thing where everybody was, there was a lot going on between, especially black people and white people. How have you seen it change over the years? Do you think it's gotten better or worse, I guess?
I think things are improved. I think, again, the communications, the people talking more to each other, and I think as time goes by, the relationships between all the different people, diverse people in the country will kind of blend, and people will just have a merging of all the different races.
Back to the melting pot thing, I guess, huh?
Yeah, I guess that's what you could call it that.
All right, where were you when you heard or saw Neil Armstrong walk on the moon?
Yeah, because we were in our living room and watching television.
And every once in a while you might come across that person who didn't see it on TV and was walking down the street and saw it
Really?
in the newspaper or something. Where were you or what were you doing when you heard that JFK had been shot?
I think, again, we were watching television
Sounds like my
and
family.
we saw it, yeah.
How did the Great Depression affect your family when you were young? If you remember any of it at all? Any like specific hardships that you remember?
I think that it was harder for my mother to get employment, but and things were, finances were tight. When I was a child, I knew that there was quite a bitterness in some people because of the programs, the social programs that were used to provide work. And I'd hear about those, but we didn't. I think if there were an effect that it had on the family, it was that we didn't have a lot of money to spend. We never really did. And we didn't have, we lived very simply, of necessity. Well, I like the last one.
So, who's your favorite grandson?
Ben Henderson.
Wow, straight up.
Who's your favorite grandson?
And that's my other grandpa. How many grandkids do you have?
We have 18. How many does he have?
My other grandpa?
Yeah.
I think it's like 22 or 23. But we're old.
Yeah.
This family's really old because they have 16 great-grandkids already.
Do you know who they are?
I know most of them.
Yeah. Did you find out?
I know who all they are.
I know, but did you find out what they, how many?
22 grandkids and 60 great-grandkids.
Boy, 22, that's,
It's hard to keep them all straight.
when you start sending them Christmas cards, you really got it.
Yeah, it used to be just me. Now everybody's having kids. No great-grandkids?
Nope,